get to weather the Pacific.
Here in the harbor of Portsmouth in southern England, one of the most dramatic and fateful journeys in the history of navigation began its course 200 years ago. Most of us know the name of the ship that laid anchor here. Many know the name of the captain, but few know with certainty what actually happened on this journey. We are speaking of the HMS Bounty. It was the Bounty that set sail from here in the service of the British Crown, on a journey that was to have lasted several years, a journey from which she would in fact never return.
The King, upon representation from the merchants and planters of His Majesty's West India possessions, had thought fit that the introduction of the breadfruit tree into the islands of those seas to constitute an article of food would be of very essential benefit to the inhabitants. You, Lieutenant William Bligh, are therefore, in pursuance of His Majesty's pleasure, hereby required and directed to put to sea in the vessel you command, and proceed with her as expeditiously as possible to the Society Islands situated in the Southern Ocean.
What do you want, X-ray Papa? This is Honolulu Center. Here you very well.
After almost a year's journey, the Bounty sailed into the warm, calm waters of the South Seas. These idyllic islands with their enchanting native women, about whom the sailors had heard so much, were now within reach.
On October the 25th, 1788, we saw Otaheite. As there was great probability that we should remain a considerable time at Otaheite, it could not be expected that the intercourse of my people with the native girls should be of a very reserved nature. I therefore ordered that every person should be examined by the surgeon, and had the satisfaction to learn from his report that they were all perfectly free from any venereal complaint. Early in the next morning, we moored in Matavai Bay on the north part of the island. The ship being anchored, a great number of canoes came over to us. Their first inquiries were if we were friends. They were no sooner satisfied in this than they crowded on board in vast numbers, mainly flower-decorated girls. I have seen many parts of the world, but Otaheite is capable of being preferable to them all. If happiness could result from situation and convenience, here it is to be found in the highest perfection.
200 years have gone by, and for 200 years now, the Polynesians' way of life has been alienated from what it was in the old times. For 100 years, the French have been governing our land. We see wars, atom bombs, this army of the French government, the French Foreign Legion. We want none of those things, none at all. Send them back to those who brought them in. Captain Bligh was thrilled by the Tahitian women.
The local girls are handsome, mild in their manners and conversations, possessed of great sensibility, and have sufficient delicacy to make themselves admired and beloved. I judge them the most humane and affectionate creatures in the world.
Would you like come with me?
I think that I would have preferred very much to have arrived here in the islands with Captain Bligh or Captain Cook. To say, 200 years ago, life on board was always very, very difficult. So when they eventually arrived here after 7 or 8 or 9 month voyage, it was paradise to them, because it was such a release. We are now looking down at Matavai Bay, where the famous little ship Bounty was anchored at the end of 1788. Captain Bligh even built a greenhouse, and that breadfruit greenhouse was down there on the beach, where we can see a few canoes, and there all the breadfruit plants were until the ship moved over.
Monday, January the 5th, 1789. At the relief of the watch at 4 o'clock this morning, the small cutter was missing. I was immediately informed of it and mustered the ship's company, when it appeared that 3 men were absent. They had taken with them 8 stand of arms and ammunition. I soon received information that the deserters had departed to the island of Tetiaroa.
Carita, whoever wants to land here in Tetiaroa needs your okay. Why so?
The islands belong to Mr. Marlon Brando, and I'm taking care of the islands.
How did that come?
In 1961, when I was making a mutiny on the Bounty, and I was playing Maimiti's part, and I was his partner in film Mutiny on the Bounty. And I'm living here with my 3 children.
When did Marlon Brando buy this island?
Soon after the film Mutiny on the Bounty. The film Mutiny on the Bounty changed my life very much.
This happiness found by the Hollywood actor Marlon Brando was never to be realized by the 3 Bounty deserters on Tetiaroa. Pursued by the natives whom Captain Bligh had asked for assistance, the fugitive deserters fled on and attempted to reach the island of Moorea. But Moorea also proved unlucky for them. Exhausted and in miserable condition, they returned to Tahiti, directly behind Moorea. Captain Bligh personally took the deserters into custody. The men were put in chains for 10 days and were given 24 lashes both before and after their confinement. This was a mild punishment for a time when the usual sentence for desertion was death.
February the 27th, 1789. The plants are in a very fine state.
A short time later, Captain Bligh directed his men to start preparing for their departure. Nearly all the natives turned out, gathering where the ship was at anchor. So it was with deep sorrow when the Bounty finally set sail on April 4th, 1789, and disappeared into the northwest horizon. Exactly 1 week after leaving Tahiti, something quite unexpected happened. On a spot where all charts indicated there should be nothing but open sea, there suddenly appeared an island.
We were within 3 miles of the southernmost key and could see a number of people within the reefs. The name of the island, they told me, was Aitutaki. The islanders spoke the same language as at Otaheite, with very little variation. They were friendly and inoffensive in their manners. They said that there were no hogs or dogs on the island. I therefore ordered a young boar and sow to be put into their canoe, as we could afford to part with it. 2 of the islanders purposed to stay all night with us. I would have treated their confidence with the regard it merited, but it was impossible to say how far the ship might be driven from the island in the night.
To this day, hardly a thing has changed on this peaceful and friendly isle. The life is that of quiet simplicity. World politics, competitiveness, and industrial crises lie at a reassuring distance. Like a large family, the natives of the island live together in peace and harmony. Soon after the discovery of Aitutaki, the Bounty arrived at the first island of the Ha'apai group, belonging to the Tonga archipelago. It's a good half-hour's flight from here, the main island of Tonga Tapu. Captain Bligh was in a bad temper when he appeared on deck around noon on April 27th, 1789. Furious, Bligh vented his wrath upon his second-in-command, Fletcher Christian.
Damn your blood! You've stolen my coconuts! I was dry. I thought it of no consequence. I took one only, and I'm sure no one touched another. You lie, you scoundrel! You've stolen one half! Why do you treat me thus, Captain Bligh? No reply! A damn thief, that's what you are! I hope you do not think me so mean as to be guilty of stealing half of your coconuts. Yes, you damned hound, I do! You must have stolen half of them, or you could give a better account of them. There never was such a set of damn thieving rascals under any man's command before. God damn you, you scoundrels! I'll sweat you for it, and I'll make half of you jump overboard before you get through Endeavour Straits.
The Bounty was sailing a few miles south of the 2 islands, Tofua and Kau, just in front of us, when Christian, together with 4 fellowmen, entered Bligh's cabin.
What is the meaning of this violence? Hold your tongue, sir! What's the matter? What's the matter? What's the matter? Mr. Bligh, you are my prisoner! Murder! 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 Murder!
Now, the ship came alive. The mutiny on the Bounty had begun.
With the reports of many eyewitnesses, it is now possible to reconstruct the actual events of the mutiny. Well, the bark, in fact, was rather worse than the bite. Indeed, from the fact that the mutiny had been going on for 5 hours, you can realize that it probably wasn't all that well organized and was a bit haphazard. You might almost say it was something of a shambles. Of course, only a very few crew members were actively involved in it. Most of them seem to have joined Christian rather half-heartedly. Yet, on the other hand, it has to be admitted that nobody seems to have made any great effort to deal with the situation and to stop the mutiny happening. Everyone, including the officers, seems to have stood by, and no one indeed gave Bligh very much in the way of support.
Come, Captain Bligh. Your officers and men are now on the boat, and you must go with them. If you attempt to make the least resistance, you will instantly be put to death. Consider what you are about, Mr. Christian. For God's sake, drop it. I'll give my bond never to think of it again if you'll desist. I have a wife and 4 children in England, and you have danced my children on your knees. It is too late, Captain Bligh. Do you consider this treatment a proper return for all the friendship I have given you in the past? That, Captain Bligh, that is the thing. I am in hell. I am in hell!
First, Bligh and his men tried to secure water and a supply of breadfruit on a nearby island. It wasn't long before they were discovered by the natives. Bligh sensed that the islanders were planning something. But the attack came sooner than anyone expected. The Englishmen barely saved themselves by escaping to their boat. Unfortunately, one didn't make it. Horrified, his mates watched while on the beach, the natives beat him to death. While Bligh was considering his alternatives, his men urged him to lose no time, but to sail straight away to the next European settlement, regardless of the distance.
Captain Bligh and his 17 companions were sailing in here, in between Vitilevu and Vanulevu. This passage was named Bligh Water, after Captain Bligh. Down there, that's the Asau group in the northwest of Fiji. A few miles offshore from that one island, the boat was discovered. Two large native canoes tried to catch up with the boat. A wild hunt began. Oh, stop! No, please!
But by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the canoes gave over chase. During most of the days, the sea flew over us with great force and kept us bailing with horror and anxiety. We were so covered with rain and sea that during the night we experienced cold and shiverings scarce to be conceived. A situation more distressing has perhaps seldom been experienced.
Minutely, Captain Bligh recorded every detail of those terrible days. The existence of these notes, which later helped him in writing his official logbook, was up until a short while ago unknown. The descendants of Bligh had the papers bound into this small volume. In 1976, it was auctioned at the Christie Gallery in London and brought the handsome price of £55,000 sterling. The book was purchased by the Australian National Library in Canberra, where it is kept today.
May the 28th, 1789, in the morning at daylight, we caught sight of the reefs of Australia. The sea broke furiously over every part.
18 pairs of eyes gazed with a curious mixture of awe and fear at the foaming reef. Where would it allow passage? Suddenly, an inlet free of breakers opened before them. Pulled by a strong current, the ship glided through to the other side, into the still, colorful waters of the Great Barrier Reef. On the basis of the precise descriptions recorded by Captain Bligh, we are able to pinpoint exactly this passage through which the ship made its safe entry into those calm waters. Finally, on July 12th, 1789, with their very last ounce of strength, Bligh and his men reached the Dutch settlement of Kupang on the southeast coast of Timor. On May 28, 1789, precisely 1 month after the mutiny, the Bounty sailed through this passage into the lagoon of Tubuai. If the mutineers counted on a reception similar to the friendly one they had received on Tahiti, they were to be thoroughly disappointed. At very first contact, the Tubuai Islanders proved to be treacherous and belligerent.
What is the purpose of your visit in Tubuai? But that is really a long time ago. I am sure you want to visit Fort George. There you see the sign 1789, exactly as I told you. Plenty fighting and problems all the time. Finally, the mutineers gave up. After 3 months, they left Tubuai again.
Disappointed, the mutineers left Tubuai behind them. The majority wanted to return to Tahiti. In a short but moving speech, Christian addressed his comrades.
Gentlemen, I will carry you and land you wherever you please. I desire no one to stay with me, but I have one favor to request. That you will grant me the ship, tie the foresail, and give me a few gallons of water, and leave me to run before the wind. And I shall land upon the first island the ship drives me to. After what I have done, I cannot remain at Otaheite. I will live nowhere where I may be apprehended and brought home to be a disgrace to my family.
On September 22nd, 1789, the Bounty put in at Matavai Bay for the third and last time. Here the group split up. Beside the 7 loyalists who had not participated in the mutiny, 9 other men left the ship. Although these 9 men had been actively involved in the mutiny, they decided to stay behind in Tahiti. After the disaster in Tubuai, they had little desire for such further adventures. In addition, this blissful life in Tahiti was so enticing that they ignored the very real danger of discovery and arrest. That same night, Fletcher Christian had the anchor raised. With 12 Tahitian women and 6 Tahitian men, he then sailed with the remaining 8 mutineers out into the vastness of the Pacific Ocean towards an unknown destination. This was the last the world was to hear of the Bounty for several decades. For the 16 men remaining on Tahiti, life was like a fairy tale. The days passed in song, dance, and gaiety. For a year and a half, the Bounty's sailors were pampered by the hospitable and exciting island girls. Suddenly, their carefree existence was shattered. On March 23, 1791, the British warship Pandora appeared in Matavai Bay. It had been sent by the Admiralty to search for the mutineers and to take them into custody. The day of reckoning had come. While the Loyalists and some of the mutineers immediately surrendered, the rest of the men fled into the high and overgrown jungle of the Tahitian hills. A wild chase began. The search party was able to win the assistance of the natives by offering various gifts. The net around the fleeing mutineers was pulled tighter and tighter. After a few days, the fugitives were completely surrounded. Without having the slightest clue as to the whereabouts of Fletcher Christian and the Bounty, Captain Edwards began searching the South Seas. He began his pursuit in the Society Islands. In Huahine, nothing was to be found. Nothing in Taha'a either. Then came Bora Bora, but here again, not even a trace. There was little planning or consideration in this mostly random search. After almost 4 months of futile pursuit, the Pandora reached the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Australia. Here, Captain Edwards' ruthlessness and ill treatment of his captives was exceeded only by the lack of attention to his navigational duties. He let the Pandora run aground directly on the coral reef. 4 prisoners were drowned. Edwards had strictly forbidden them to be released from their irons in time. Along a similar route to the one Bligh had followed, the shipwrecked men of the Pandora found their way back to England. In a fair and just court-martial, only 3 of the mutineers were sentenced to die by hanging. This death sentence, found in a London archive, was passed by 11 naval captains under the leadership of Vice Admiral Lord Hood. The execution took place on a warship in the Bay of Portsmouth, on the same spot where 5 years earlier the Bounty had started on its ill-fated voyage.
At 9 o'clock, the flag displayed the dreadful summons to claim the attention of all the fleet. One of the 3 mutineers addressed the ship's company, confessed their errors they had been guilty of, and acknowledged the justice of their sentences. And their souls took their flight in a cloud.
Professor Maud, at the University of Australia you have made extensive studies on the Odyssey of the Bounty after the mutiny.
Well, up till then, it had been thought, generally speaking, that the Tahitian girls had joined the mutineers of their own free will. But actually, Jenny tells us that this was not, in fact, the case. Most of them had been tricked.
Is it known where Fletcher Christian went in search for a suitable hideaway?
Not very long after they left Tahiti, they found a simply lovely island. And when I started to research into the local oral tradition, I found that, in fact, the Bounty had, without doubt, visited that place.
My mother was a great-granddaughter of Fletcher Christian of the Bounty, and my father was a great-grandson of Edward Young of the Bounty.
Why didn't your ancestors settle here in Rarotonga?
Actually, Rarotonga would have been an ideal place for them to settle. However, after the mutineers settled on an island called Tobuai and had trouble with the inhabitants there, Rarotonga would have been an ideal spot. But, I mean, as Rarotonga wasn't plotted on the chart, but it was inhabited, and Christians and the mutineers didn't want to have any more trouble, same as Tobuai.
At that point, Christian turned the ship right around and steered away to the east, looking for this tiny island right away on the eastern side of the Pacific Ocean. And the reason for that was that he had discovered in the ship's library Captain Cartwright's account. When the mutineers saw this outline of Pitcairn just 9 months after the mutiny, they realized at once that this was an absolutely ideal hideout which had been made for them. The island, just 2 miles long and 1 mile wide, is so steep and rugged that even such a small plane as yours couldn't land there. The mutineers landed on the north side of the island, where the coastline forms a small indentation. They took everything they needed ashore, and then they set fire to the ship. This little bay has been known ever since as Bounty Bay. Thus, their last link with the world was cut, and their lifelong exile on this island began.
Mr. Maud was right. There is in fact no landing strip on Pitcairn. We are here in one of the remotest, loneliest areas on Earth. In almost every azimuth there is nothing but vast ocean. The nearest continent there to the east is South America, almost 6,000 miles distant. In that direction, it is Australia, more than 4,500 miles. And there to the north, nothing but water all the way up to Alaska. The nearest island with an airstrip is Mangareva, approximately 400 miles from here. That's where we took off from, and that's where we now try to find back.
It is a proven fact that the Bounty was burned and sunk in the vicinity of Pitcairn Island. Here, in the midst of a quiet botanical garden at the Museum of Fiji in Suva, one can view the remains of a relic found on Pitcairn nearly a half-century ago. There, in 1932, Parkin Christian, a great-grandson of Fletcher Christian, discovered the charred remains of the Bounty's rudder at the bottom of Bounty Bay. The relic was brought to Fiji in 1945, where it may still be seen today.
Mr. Christian, along with most of the other Bounty descendants, you are living here in Norfolk Island, far away from the dark era in Pitcairn.
The mutineers portioned the island up between themselves, but completely left the Tahitian men out of the order of things, and this created a problem. Another factor was the fact that the mutineers had a wife each, a woman each, but there were only 3 women for the 6 Tahitian men. Just 4 years after arriving on Pitcairn, the Tahitians, giving vent to their feelings of oppression, brutally massacred 5 of the mutineers, including Fletcher Christian, whose body was mutilated beyond recognition. The violence on Pitcairn at that time was unbelievable.
Where actually did the loyalties of the Polynesian girls lie?
Surprisingly, without exception, the women took the part of the white men. They even assisted the surviving mutineers in their revenge against the Tahitian men. In a matter of days, all the Tahitian men were dead. But it's better for my friend Baker McCoy, also a direct descendant, to tell you about this.
My direct ancestor, the mutineer William McCoy, grew up in Scotland. His father worked in a whisky distillery. McCoy himself got drunk and fell over a cliff to his death. Adams and Young caused a miraculous change on Pitcairn Island by producing the Bounty Bible and teaching the community the word of our dear Lord. Ah, here comes Shelley. What thing you all you been doing this morning?
Just been up in Gilly's pad at Muckaboat.
What thing you all you going to do now?
We go down Dots, getting a little salmon for good on Nawi, but we have to come back quite soon because Mum had to cook one supper this night, and I have to go down our wally for get some lemon.
What kind of language is that?
This is Pitcairn language. It is a cross between West Country English and Tahitian. It is widely spoken on the island even today. Hey, Baker, what time was the Pitcairn community discovered by Folger? 1808, wasn't it?
Yes, it was 1808, 19 years after the arrival of the Bounty with the mutineers and their Tahitian wives.
A descendant of John Adams, the patriarch of Pitcairn, works as a duty officer on the island of Norfolk. Mr. Wayne Adams checks through here daily the tourists, mostly from Australia, upon which the island is financially dependent. Of the original 9 mutineers, his great-grandfather was the last surviving member, when in 1808 the American Captain Folger discovered by chance the little English-Tahitian colony on Pitcairn. It was from Captain Folger that the world was finally to learn of the fate of the remaining Bounty mutineers.
In the year 1856, the entire community, numbering now almost 200 people, was transferred here to Norfolk Island, on the opposite side of the Pacific. Pitcairn had become far too small. Among those who came was Mary Christian, Fletcher Christian's daughter. This is her grave. She was the youngest of his 3 children and was born just a few days after him being murdered.
Who do you feel was responsible for the mutiny, Captain Bligh or Fletcher Christian?
I don't personally have any prejudices. When the film Mutiny on the Bounty starring Marlon Brando had its world premiere, I was invited to England to attend, where I met a member of the Bligh family. He was quite a charming fellow and we got on quite well. But nevertheless, Bligh, in my opinion, was the one who caused the mutiny.
No, it was certainly not Captain Bligh's fault. Contrary to a very widespread opinion, Captain Bligh was not a small dictator, a sadist, a tyrant at all. He certainly had certain faults, especially he lacked, shall we say, tact or psychological insight. But a Navy captain in those days was not supposed to have psychological insight and tact. He was a very good captain who looked after his crew very well, almost like a father from the beginning to the end. And people were not flogged more often on the Bounty than on other Navy ships in those days. So, I mean, to say simply that without Fletcher Christian aboard the Bounty, there would have never had been a mutiny.
Mr. Evans, historian and registrar in the London Public Record Office, has a different opinion.
Bligh or Christian? Well, perhaps that is the wrong starting point. And perhaps the problem is really rather deeper than that. It is important to remember that both of them were relatively young men. Now, at Bligh's grave here in London, you can see that he died in 1817 at the age of 65, which means that at the time of the mutiny he was 35 years old. Well, we have to form our conclusions from a number of small details. Now, for instance, at Tahiti, Bligh was obviously very eager to humiliate Christian in front of the girl. Then there was the occasion just before the mutiny when he gave way to a furious outburst of rage. Bligh, as commanding officer and mindful of his status and his dignity and his authority, seems to have had no relationships of any kind with the island girls. Well, to one seaman who was later returned to England in the Pandora, Christian, after the mutiny, confessed the secret. This seaman kept that secret throughout his whole life and finally took it with him to the grave. A recent study offers the suggestion that that secret was in fact the existence of such a relationship between Bligh and Christian. It is an assumption which would fit with his repeated cry throughout the mutiny, "I'm in hell." It is a risky, daring suggestion, but it is not impossible.
The mutiny on the Bounty was the mutiny of a single man. There was no oppressed crew to be delivered from the domination of a cruel, tyrannical sea captain. Neither was there a desire to return to a loved one left behind in the South Seas. The mutiny on the Bounty was the explosive dissolution of a friendship that had erupted into uncontrollable passions. It was due to the temptation and lure of the South Seas that the mutiny succeeded at all. Life on the island of eternal spring, with food and sex in abundance, made it easy for the simple sailors to bid farewell to king and homeland forever. The men only secured for themselves that idyllic life which everyone on board, including the loyalists, desired. In fact, without the sympathy of the loyal members of the crew, the small and poorly guided group would probably never have been able to bring off the most famous mutiny in the history of navigation.